Hey, what's going on, everybody? Today is Monday, May 27th. And if you're in the States, it is Memorial Day. So today, welcome. We've got Beth, Karl, Andy, and I'm Brian. And we are here today to talk about the sort of new rules, if you will, that OpenAI has put out about how to create really good, effective custom GPTs. And when we talk about new rules, we're specifically talking about the prompting that goes on the back end. So I think for the most part, a lot of our audience is already familiar with custom GPTs, but if you're not, that's totally fine. We can give you a quick crash course here. So depending on whether you had the free side or the paid side of ChatGPT, you would have to have the paid side to do this. Now, recently, the free side can start seeing the custom GPTs, but they can't build them. On the paid side, you can build a custom GPT. So what is a custom GPT? Well, the easiest way to think about them is this. You start off with a prompt, any prompt. Do this for me, write this blog on this topic. And you start using that prompt and you're like, wow, I use this prompt. I actually go back and use this a lot, but I'm just recreating the wheel. Every time I do this, it's kind of silly. And then you refine that prompt and you're like, you know what, when I say this or that or the other in this prompt, it actually makes it a little bit better. So that would be like a stepping stone towards creating actually something for a prompt library. But you're still using this prompt and you're going into ChatGPT and you're copy and pasting it, or you're just going back to your old thread and you threw a little emoji icon in there so you knew where it was on the left side of your screen in ChatGPT. And you're like, yeah, you know what? It works every single time. Actually, that's totally fine in a lot of cases. But in a lot of cases, what you want to do is take the next step from there. And it tends to be very similar in prompting to creating a custom GPT. Now, why would you want to take that extra step if everything is working just fine? A couple reasons. One, it's always going to be easier to find because you're not going to be scrolling through some, maybe you didn't use it for a week or two and now you're trying to find that emoji and, things change, the model changes, now you're using 4 Omni and things are weird or whatever. Or you were going way back, you were using a plugin and they got rid of plugins and then that prompt won't work anymore, right? So there could be issues like that. But a larger issue, although you could upload it as a document every single time, you could say, hey, go look at this master document about my company, let's say about scale.com or something like that. It's going to be much easier to go ahead and go into a custom GPT and upload that document as a knowledge base. And then it lives within that custom GPT. Now, custom GPTs are a little funny because they don't work exactly like it does outside of them. Meaning when it comes to things like memory, a custom GPT in its own thread will have a bit of memory built into it, but it does not necessarily go and grab your memory that OpenAI just came out with, which is a little weird that it's not always like that, but it's sort of the way they have it set up right now. So the idea here is that a custom GPT is nothing more, not even really, I won't even use the word fancy. It's nothing more than a prompt that you have identified that gives you really good results, and you're going to use it over and over and over again. How often? 2 to 3 times a week is by far a great reason to start with a custom GPT. So now that you have that roundabout, there's not really a right or wrong way. And necessarily, people can do very basic prompts in there and make a custom GPT. People can get very complex. We've seen those like Grimoire. We've seen other ones that are like, we don't necessarily know what's on the back end, but you can just tell when you use it, like it's advanced. So there's a wide range from a very, very simple 4-line prompt that could be a custom GPT to something that's pulling in up to 10 documents on the back side. That could be PDFs, spreadsheets. It could be a lot of things. You can also connect them to APIs, although it's still not very good and it's a little slow and chunky and it's not always worth doing it. But you could technically create or take a custom GPT and connect it to Salesforce. It just isn't a great user experience at this particular time. It'll get better. Okay, so there's your crash course. I'll stop talking there. And then what I would love to do, guys, is sort of maybe just start this conversation talking about how maybe your prompting has evolved. Then let's go ahead and share a page of the article from OpenAI. And let's just kind of break down what they're now suggesting, why we think there's been some maybe changes or pivots, why it's necessary to keep evolving how we write prompts, what maybe we all learned 6-9 months ago isn't as applicable today as it was back then. So I don't know. Karl, you're coming back with us. You were traveling a bit, sending us all sorts of super cool pictures and things going in Paris, which we will, I think maybe Wednesday, if you're here. Are you going to be here on Wednesday? Because I think it'd be fun to do a deep dive into that. Maybe it's a whole show. Carlson, you're just coming back to us after a week and probably a little bit jet lagged. Kind of, I don't know, maybe take us through your sort of thought on custom GPT prompting, where you were, and maybe how this changes it a little bit.
Uh, I just want to take it back a little bit to,
Sure.
I remember there was, when custom GPTs first came out, there was an ability, I don't know if it's an ability or a hack or a cheat, where you could download or see every single person's custom instructions. So what I actually did is there was this GitHub repo where I downloaded everybody's custom instructions. Like this person updated it on a regular basis, Grimoire included everything. And what I did was I started studying just bits and pieces, like random, like the more popular ones, the ones that I've never heard of before. I just want to see how people were prompting.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating how something like Grimoire is very, very complex. Like there were instructions, two instructions. Like it was instructing it. And there's a lot of if this, then that, if this, then that. And it's quite complex. But I think we all know it's really slow. Like it was like, you had to wait. And now with GPT-4o, I believe it's a lot faster. But it's funny where the number one thing that OpenAI did say was, hey, we got to simplify these complex instructions. There's a lot of, like, people were, and even before custom GPTs, I think we all have these really complex because we need it specifically to do all these specific tasks and so on. But I feel, based on some of the things that I've seen, OpenAI demo and so on, I do believe the reason why they're giving these, hey, be a little bit more clear, simplify your instructions, be specific, but don't go into too crazy, like all this detail, is because I think they're just prepping us for, as the models get better with higher reasoning, it will understand you a little bit better. And that's how I look at these things, right? I think my prompting has evolved a little bit to, it still follows the principles that some of us were taught, right? The master principle of making sure you have markdown, you have examples in it, you specify to one thread. But I don't have to go into two, this is what I want you to do. And you can still do that, but I feel like you can be more specific and be simple. And that's how I feel my prompting has become, because I feel like as the models has evolved, it's gotten a little bit better understanding. Now, Brian, I know there's a lot of things that sometimes you get frustrated with ChatGPT, and I think Claude has better reasoning, but that's what I mean. Like every single one of these LLMs, regardless of OpenAI, Anthropic, they're going to have their version of this. You have gems with Google. I think like all the models will just get better at understanding you, right? And so I think like when you say, I love Claude because it can understand, like, oh, for sure, but it's going to jump one to one. And I think it's just going to understand us a little bit better. But you still have to have, I guess, a foundation that we've all learned, like be specific, provide examples, be clear, and, take on a role to narrow the scope. Because I think like in the end, remember how much billions and trillions of data, it's parameters it's been trained on. So you have to specify what it's going to be looking for. And maybe in the future, it can do that on its own. And then go from there. And so that's kind of a little bit of my take of where I think it's just getting more simple, but still being specific.
Can I ask you a quick follow-up question? Because you're the one that brings this up quite a bit, is system one versus system two thinking. Do you see this as, we always talk on the show about, hey, don't wait for AI to quit full solve your problem. Get in there, get dirty, write prompts, break prompts, have prompts break on you. I'll raise my hand. I'm Brian, and I definitely had prompts break on me, and it's going to happen, right? It's just part of this journey. So is that worth it? Should we wait till these prompts are, and this is a hypothetical question, right? Obviously, but like, should we wait until, these prompts are perfect and they can do it? Or do you, obviously when we think about system two thinking, and you're the one that's really sort of educated me on this, is like, it's the more analytical, the deliberate, the rational side of the thinking process. But we know that is exactly the type of thinking it's going to take to succeed in a future world of AI, because up until the point where AI just can take any sort of gibberish that comes out of our mouth and make it into really, really good instructions, for a long time, probably, we're going to have to be the human in the loop and give it really good instructions. And agents and things like that are going to go do it for us repetitively thereafter. But there's probably a huge gap between the day where we have to explain it in detail and in order and rationally to when an AI can just do that all for us. So I don't know, Karl, my question was just is like, do you see this as a way of further training us all on how to do system two thinking?
I think when you talk about system one, system two thinking, just to recap, system one thinking, an example would be 2 plus 2, everyone thinks 4. But if you go 3,400.7766 divided by 4,000, like 2,764 points, you actually have to stop and really think that through, right? That would be example of system one versus system two thinking. So when we talk right now, when we're crafting all these prompts, I think it's so important that everybody get dirty, because it isn't necessarily about, I can prompt the best. It's like, no, that's part of it. Cool. But I think it's like for all of us understanding how these things work, what breaks it, what doesn't, what are some of the things that we need to include? Like we've seen people like get frustrated because they can't get the output and they say AI sucks. But all we had to do is like, hey, could you throw in an example? And then it works. Yeah. Or maybe just have a couple markdown to actually separate what you're talking about. Like very simple things, but unless you actually get in there and keep trying, it's not going to work. So going back to system one, system two thinking, I think all the systems, I think most people would agree, all these LLMs right now are system one thinking, even though we put in think through step by step, take a deep breath. Here's $100. I'm going to tip you, whatever that the latest thing is. The hack of the day is. But I do feel like the next set, because we're right now, all the models are kind of in the same area, right? Whatever is little leading the way, it doesn't matter. You're going to see Claude 4. You're going to see Llama 3, Llama 4. You're going to see the next ones are coming. Even I think Elon Musk said, Grok 3, whatever. All of them are going to be pushing the boundaries. So, and could it be system two? I'm not sure, but I think for all of us, everyone listening, it's important to go in there, understand how the system works. So even though it can be better, how these things, all the little tricks and tips that maybe you can add if something's not working for you. I'm sure, Andy, you can probably give an example of maybe a career or a path where even though the technology has evolved, the person who has, because I can't think of one right now, who has learned all the ins and outs is a much better leverage, or the person who can leverage that tech than someone who just appeared and starts using the technology.
Yeah, I can give you an example of that right off the top of my head, because we have a show coming up on Thursday about it, which is business information systems, or BI, like data analysis is something that large language models are going to kind of take over to a large degree. But the people who've been involved in data analysis will be much more facile with the ways of instructing the AI, because they understand what the underlying processes are that have to be accumulated in a step-by-step or chain of thought process in order to arrive at solid decision support. So there's one example. And I think it's interesting to look at the Grimoire example. And I think also Mr. Reindeer, which is a tutorial process. And you look at the prompts that are behind those that were revealed through the GitHub repository that you mentioned earlier, Karl. These are done by programmers. And programmers think in logical steps. They have to, in order to write code to do that. They have to understand, okay, if the user is doing this and they say that, this is a conditional branch. I need you to go take that and move over to this other set of sequenced instructions and execute those, right? So there's a discipline, there's an order to programmatic thinking that's available to a person who's done computer science. And that's what has allowed somebody like Nick Dobos, who wrote Grimoire, this amazing coding copilot in ChatGPT's custom GPT set. The instructions and all of the nested ways that the different functions that he's made that thing capable of doing are laid out are beyond the ken of somebody like me who's not a programmer. But I understand its complexity, and I see that. Now, he'll always be in a better position to do something that's about coding, which is what Grimoire is about. It's using large language models to do that, than somebody who didn't have that discipline, sort of formed in their minds, at an early age, presumably.
Yeah. But I think that's sorry.
No, Karl, go.
Well, I just wanted to add that up. It's like whoever has these, like a doctor, I think since the beginning of AI, when we were talking about AI, the doctor, the plumber, whatever profession you're in, you are going to be able to get a better output from AI because you're going to know the right question to ask. You're going to see through any hallucinations, and you can dig a little deeper on your specific field versus somebody who's like just a novice in it, because they can ask random questions and it'll bring the knowledge level up. But those who are specialists, and I think that's always been the case throughout, however months we've been in this, is that the people who are the specialists, they can probably get the best outputs because they know what to ask and what to see. So, for example, Brian, you're in sales. For example, Beth, in Salesforce, if you ask specific Salesforce questions, you'll know what's like, hey, that's BS, that's right, that's kind of right. I'm going to ask this specific question. I'm going to get the answer that I want.
So, yes.
Go ahead,
And
Beth.
one of the things that I want to say in this is that both Grimoire and Mr. Reindeer actually make use of pseudocode. So it isn't that they're taking their coding knowledge and they're writing actual code for ChatGPT to execute. They're taking their understanding of the pattern of code, where you have something that indicates this is a variable, and there are structures that can say that, and a variable would be like, I'm going to give you a variable goal, and these are the steps I want you to take. And now I'm going to say what the goal is, or the user is going to input goal equals blah, blah, blah. Right? So now you've created a structure for ChatGPT or these other or the other flavors, right? To understand within a context what you're saying, and those can be repeatable in that way. And that is one of the ways that Brian was talking about in the very beginning, that is something that you might do multiple times a day, multiple times a week. Therefore, it becomes a custom GPT as opposed to a prompt that you just use over and over.
And it's so important too for companies to think about this, because I will tell you, we know this. I mean, for all of us do consulting in some ways and talk to people. I run into this all the time, where there's just silos. There's natural silos that form at companies where I'm not even talking about finance and HR, which would be a natural sort of barrier there. And you're not going to run into a ton of companies where you're like, look, our HR and our finance are in lockstep. Look, maybe, but a lot of times you're going to find silos there. A lot of times people are like, I know I have a coworker in a larger company and I see them at retreats and on some meetings, but we do not interact a lot. But even within departments, like let's just say a sales department or in an HR or in finance, right? There's silos that naturally arrive there. Now there's geographical silos because a lot of us work remote, and sometimes not bumping into people in an office hurts the company in a lot of ways there. We've talked about that, how maybe a hybrid approach or a full office can be better in a lot of ways. But let's just say around the water cooler type thing, me and Karl having a conversation, me and Beth have a conversation, and I'm like, yeah, I've actually, what have you been doing today? Like, man, I actually spent most of the morning creating this custom GPT. And they'd be like, oh, really? For what? We're like, well, you know how we always have to do this TPS report, and throw back to Office Space. And I just got tired. I just got tired of doing the manual process of TPS. So it's so stupid. So I decided, you know what? I owe one today to the boss. I'm just going to actually take the extra 2 hours it takes to create a custom GPT. And actually, you know what? It just took that process from 45 minutes down to 3. Like this is a very real, very natural, very real world solution. But the thing is, we know that a lot of people aren't, like, a company doesn't know that somebody solved the TPS problem, right? Somebody is using it on their computer, but custom GPTs, if you're not doing that way, if you maybe don't have a Teams account or enterprise or whatever, a lot of times those custom GPTs aren't getting shared across that divide to the rest of the team. And so a lot of things that we deal with consultants is not always even just about how to use AI. It's like how to have an AI plan for the company, because you are going to arrive. Somebody's going to create these new solutions. But what's even scarier is one person has the solution and nobody else knows they have it.
This is why leadership is so important in this process, because you want to make sure that the whole company is reassured from the leader down that we want you to explore this. If you find a solution you think would be helpful for other people, that's awesome, right? Like, let's share that. Whereas if there's silence or there's a very, very strict, like you can use it in these specific situations, that kind of thing, that reduces the likelihood that people are going to share. I have to say, it does not reduce the likelihood that people are going to try to use AI to solve their own problems. So, like, Andy, you're our leader. What are your thoughts about leadership coming into this as a
I think I have an interesting angle on that. I think I'm pretty successful at getting what I want out of AI, because as a general manager, I really know from a long body of experience what questions to ask. And if you ask a generic question or just a general query to a GPT, it's going to give you an answer. But I often find myself conversationally saying, okay, great, but you didn't mention anything about this area. And that knowledge of the sort of the domain of all the things that a business manager should be thinking about is really important to getting something out of a conversation with a very knowledgeable, but maybe not very that intern that is the AI is not a problem solver. It's an answer giver at this stage. Now, eventually it'll be imbued with all of the necessary domain knowledge that it could actually arrive at a higher level of reasoning and be able to ask the right questions of itself. And we see that emerging in the agentic form. But right now, it's really important for leadership to take advantage of the internal corporate knowledge that their senior executive staff has about just what things are important and what things are not, and capture those in custom GPT instructions. So you can give a custom GPT the list of all the things that it should be asking about in respect of a certain kind of query. And you can make that specific to a certain department, function, etc. But then you collectively, as a team, you build into those instruction sets that, okay, GPT, when you're given a variable like this, then here's 11 things that we want you to consider before outputting your response, making sure that it covers all the bases. Because so often I'll generate something with, I'm moving quickly and I just write a quick query. I call them queries, but they're really just prompts in natural language. And then what comes out is not as complete as I wanted it to be. And I can point the GPT to add things to it. And then it fleshes out to the point where I'm satisfied based on my experience that it's gotten the full range of what needs to be discussed about this.
So why don't we do this? Why don't we just pull up on the screen real quick the article. Now, as far as where to find this, I actually find this hard to Google. Beth had shared it with us internally. So I just want to give you the sort of the SEO words here. So key guidelines for writing instructions for custom GPTs. If you type that into Google, it'll get you to the right place. It's just an article in OpenAI, but I still find it kind of hard. It seems buried to me a little bit. So that's where you can sort of find this. But let's just look at some of the instructions or some of the suggestions. We won't dive in deep. Certainly you can dive in deeper to this. And then after this, I'll show an example of ChatGPT using this. So the first thing it says is like, look, you want to enhance your instructions. And we've talked about some of these already, but simplifying complex instructions, Karl mentioned that. But I will tell you in this area, a place that I would want people to focus and that I have had very good success with in the last week or two is this idea of trigger and instruction. So it says it looks something like this. It's not saying it has to look exactly like this, but a trigger, user submits information, instruction, analyze information for themes. So to me, what I get out of this particular area is that I would typically write my instructions at the end of a prompt because there's a recency bias on the way. I'm assuming that's the same. Rachel Woods was the one that taught me that from the AI exchange, that it actually reads from the bottom up. Assuming that's still the case, I always put my instructions at the bottom of the prompt so that it was the most important thing. I wanted to be the very last thing I read. So it was the first thing that the custom GPT or ChatGPT saw. I don't know if that's still the case. I'd be interested to learn that or not. It's not something that's talked a lot. But what I like here is that we're embedding instructions at the point of the particular task or part of the instructions, which I wasn't necessarily doing, and I've started doing, and I do see success with it. So I like this idea of triggers and instructions, and you're going to see an example that I'm about to show on a Google Doc where it even has another section to that. So we'll talk about that. Structure for clarity. So breaking down second level instructions into separate steps. Yes, break down things into steps. I mean, that is just 101 type stuff when you're writing any type of prompt is just do not give it one big old paragraph of a whole bunch of things you wanted to do. If it's a step-by-step process, if it's that hypothetical intern, if it's, whatever, try to think about what all the steps are. The reason you want to do that ahead of time anyway is because you may actually uncover that AI solution, a language model is actually not a great solution. That does not mean you have to throw everything out. It just means that you may end up having a solution where a custom GPT might do steps 1, 2, and 3. It actually for steps 4 and 5 leaves the computer because a human has to be involved. Then a human re-inputs whatever happened at the human level for steps 8, 9, and 10. Right? That's a very real thing that might happen. You don't really know that, and you may accidentally find out that or think that AI can actually handle 10 steps in a row when in fact it will do 8 really, really good, but 2 of them have to be human in order for it to be great. And if you don't do that, you're going to be upset with a prompt where 8 steps were taken care of and 2 didn't, instead of being really, really happy that 8 out of the 10 were handled by AI and all you had to do is 2. So you got to adjust your thinking a little bit on it. Promote attention to detail. So incorporate, take your time, take a deep breath. This is really interesting to me. Karl also brought this up. These were things that we were hearing through the grapevine of like, hey, I'm finding solutions with this. The fact that it was sort of written in here by OpenAI, it just gives it legitimacy. It's really, really impressive. Use strengthening language to highlight critical parts of the instructions, ensuring they're not overlooked. So saying things like, this task is really important to the final outcome. Things like that strengthen a task and give it a little bit more oomph over some of the other ones. Avoid negative instructions. Okay. Hi, my name is Brian. I write in passive tense all the time. It crushed me when I was in my master's program many, many years ago. And I would get my wife, Amanda, to read all my papers once a week. I wrote 100 papers from my master's program. And she would read them. And I had a program that helped me too, but she would also find what the program missed and help me take passive verbs and make them into active verbs. If you can write with active language, you should do that. Don't write in negative. ChatGPT doesn't like it either. So that is something I will always struggle with.
Well, if you remember that it's a prediction engine, right?
Yeah.
One of the predictions to do not ever say delve is delve, right? I mean, that's one of the predicted answers. Yeah. So
that's a really, really good point. Granular steps, consistency and clarity. We heard those steps for tools and actors. Leverage your knowledge files. Specify in prompts and for knowledge extraction. Yes. If you want, it says it right here. I will tell you, I do this step all the time. Giving specific examples through few shot prompting, but also when it's talking about specify in prompts for knowledge extraction. If at that particular task or that step in the process, you wanted to stop, meaning that you want it, meaning the custom GPT, to stop and review the custom document, you should say, go to the file, name the file and say, review it in full before continuing. I will tell you that will take prompts to another level, just that alone. You can say at the end, review all knowledge documents, and that's kind of okay. And it should throw it hypothetically in memory at the beginning. You will get better results if even after doing that, even though we don't want to be overly complicated with prompts, you actually do circle back and say, hey, at this prompt, remember when I said you should go look at this knowledge document? This is when you should do that. And again, how would this be any different than an intern, right? If Beth and I were working together and she was handing me something, she'd say, this is the point. This is the point where, Brian, you want to go pick up this piece of paper, go look at row 4 and we'll look at column D. This is where the information will be. I know I told you at the beginning that you should review all these, but this is where I want you to do it specifically. So that will take you a long way. I don't want to get too deep. The only other 3 in here, examples of a good output. We're going to look at that in a second. Referencing actions. So always refer to actions by name and domain to enhance clarity. Very, very cool there. So actions are a little bit maybe on the advanced side of custom GPTs, like we talked about, OAuth, API connectors, things like that. But it's just saying reference the action you wanted to take, again, where you wanted to take it. And then explicit tool instructions. Provide explicit instructions, use tools such as browse, knowledge. I will tell you, I was not doing this. And now that I truly believe that ChatGPT is using their chatbot, their new version of browsing, by the way, has changed. That's a different topic, but browsing is not the old browsing from 2 weeks ago.
Breaking news.
It's the new browsing.
The
It's got to be because it's so it's so different than the old way of it. Then make sure that if you, again, same deal. This is repetitive, right? If you want it to now go browse, if you want citations, specifically call out that that's what you're looking for at that step. And it will do a better job of bringing back those answers. Okay, before I show examples, thoughts on this before I show a quick example of this being run?
One of the summaries of this is, if in doubt, few shot prompting. If in doubt, give examples. If in doubt, like if you're asking it to classify, give examples of what classifications you want it to use. If you have a specific outcome that you want, give examples of your outcome, right? Like few shot prompting is referenced in these specific instructions many, many times. Yep. And in fact, that I think what they're saying and what we've taught and has become more in line with getting good outcomes is that your skill at writing prompts is less important than the quality of your examples of what you're looking for.
Oh, that's such a good point. That's such a cool call out.
Okay, I agree. Look at examples. Let me add one, sure. Which is, I think these new instructions are really largely about getting you to think through what the steps are that you want the GPT to take.
Yes.
And writing those specifically in a sequence, right? Trigger and action, and number them and say, this is the path I want you to follow. That's chain of thought prompting. So their instructions are pushing us all towards, like, here's the sequence of steps that we want the GPT to take. And I think that's kind of converging on this chain of thought logic that makes it much easier for the GPT to perform well for you.
And look, these language models, they're based on human, right? So if you're thinking to yourself, how would I better explain this to another human? That's a great place to start. How could I be even more specific? How could I drill in even more? Rachel used to say this to me. Could that be another step? Rachel would say that to me all the time. And I'd be like, damn it. I remember being on calls with you, Beth, where we talk about that and stuff. She's like, could that be another step? And what she was saying was, if you had 4 steps, she would challenge us and look at step 1 and say, could that be 2 or 3 steps in itself? Which makes you start thinking about drilling down and getting even deeper and more specific into any particular instruction you have. And it's a great use case, or it's a great way to think when you're creating prompts. Go ahead, Karl. I'll cut you off there.
I think we have to remember, if we look at all since the beginning, I think November when this was released in 2023, where it is now, right? All these different elements are starting to be put onto it. So I believe, I'm not quite sure if it's like some of us have got it, some of us haven't, but we'll all eventually get it. The connection to Google Drive, Google OneDrive, right? So there's that. I believe Beth the search capability is there now. You have to put that in. So that's 2. Search connected to your data. I think eventually all of it will be GPT 4.0. Just putting in our private chat here. I think like it's all going to be switched over to GPT 4.0, which means it can see and hear its environment. And you can add those. I can only imagine those things are going to be built in. So you don't just think of custom GPTs as, hey, this is what it is today. Also start planning what it could be in the future. And when I say future, like the next three months, where all these capabilities are starting to be built on top of it, right? So you got search, you got connectors, you got to your data. And then the only thing that's missing, and I believe it's coming, is the ability to take action on your behalf. Because if it has all these pieces, you have the foundations of an agent. So your custom GPTs is literally your agent. So if you start thinking about it now, what are some of the things that you want your custom GPT? Yes, it can do all this stuff today. Yes, it can, the prompts that you use, but also, hey, if it were to take action on your behalf, what could that look like for you? And I think that's important to going into the future of what these things are. That's something that it's important to keep aware of, because that's where these things don't just stay static. They will evolve. Right. And that's, to me, a big piece of it.
Yeah. And another piece of that is not part of these instructions, but is also like getting ready for that, is if you are having a conversation, a chat conversation back and forth with ChatGPT, either as a custom GPT or straight, like just through the main interface, you can and call a custom GPT to the conversation. Yeah. So now maybe with Andy, like you have your specialist knowledge that can do this, but now you want to bring in something that specializes in categorization. You can my categorization buddy, I could speak, to the conversation, and now you're having the conversation with that. Right. And then you can call back your initial one. I tend to do that with Grimoire and a diagram thing, so that I can get a map of what we're talking about in terms of coding with Grimoire.
Beth, I think that's a great call out. I'm so glad you said that, because I wouldn't have even thought to bring that up. But, look, there's a lot of value in prompt chaining. Prompt chaining is when you might have 5 prompts. I'm just talking about a basic ChatGPT. And you're like, prompt 1. And then you're like, given the results of prompt 1, do prompt 2. Given the results of prompt 1 and prompt 2, do prompt 3, right? That's prompt chaining or a variation of that. But you're absolutely right. Using the @ now, this is getting a little complex, but you absolutely, if you have a big task, what you might end up doing is creating 5 custom GPTs that are all highly specialized on a particular task, and they do them very, very well. And you might just prompt chain by using the @ mention to custom GPTs. So instead of it being prompt 1, prompt 2, prompt 3, it's custom GPT 1, custom GPT 2, custom GPT 3 that all have really good things. Now, why would you want to go to that detail? Well, you don't all the time, but the reason you might want to do that is because now you can drill in. Now, if Andy is doing this big project and he's like, I'm going to use this custom GPT for extraction. I'm going to use this custom GPT for getting out passive verbs, right? Whatever it is, right? Whatever your reasoning is for doing that. When things need to be tweaked, just like with prompt chaining, why that's a good idea with examples, Andy can just dive in, put his finger directly on the custom GPT, tweak the instruction a little bit, and it's only going to affect the output coming out of that. It's much, much easier to go in and do evaluations. You can all sorts of different things, especially when things break, which I've talked about this a lot in the show. But look, hey, I write custom GPTs. I sell custom GPTs through Scaled. I am responsible for them for clients. And just like as a coder, I'm sure, or a engineer, it gets a little dicey when things don't start working. And as Karl just pointed out, hey, guess what? Some people have the better browsing right now. Some people have custom GPTs that have 4.0, some don't. Guess what my clients have? Who the hell knows? So some of them are getting better results from the same exact custom GPT. It depends on their end, what version and whatever they have on it. So it kind of makes a big difference. I know we're out of time here, so I won't share everything I have, but I wanted to bring this onto the screen super quick just so I could show you. By the way, what I'm showing on my screen right now, and go back if you're listening to us, go back and watch this on YouTube or any of our streaming, like Spotify or LinkedIn, where you can see this. YouTube's probably the easiest, but I had just had ChatGPT, look at the article and then come back and I said, give me your best prompt example. I said, and for this hypothetical example, say you're taking a transcript and you're going to turn it into a blog. That's all I told it. And I said, I want you to go look at this article and I don't want you to miss a step of this article. And I want you to create the best prompt. Now I think there's more to do to this prompt, but it did a role. So I would normally say act as, it called it role. Either would be fine. You're a professional content writer specializing in transforming a podcast. Okay. Then it gives it a paragraph for context. I always say context is like the background story. What's the background story I need to know to do a better job? Or in this case, hey, what's the background story custom GPT needs to know in order to do a better job? That's a good context. And then it basically gets right into the instructions, which is definitely different than the way I would have done it before. And it says step-by-step instructions. Trigger, user provides podcast information. Instruction, ask the user to provide a brief introduction of the podcast episode, including the main topic and key points. Example, please provide a brief instruction of the podcast episode, including the main topics and key points. And that may sound repetitive, but what it's actually doing is saying to custom GPT, hey, this is the trigger. This is the thing. This is the if, this, then that. This is the kickoff, right? Same thing. Here's the instruction that you're going to do. Here's an example of what you might say to the end user, me, the person using it, when you do that. And so this is a great way, and I found a lot of success recently when things are in quotes like this example of getting a little bit more customization out of custom GPTs, because sometimes to my users, when it's a sales thing, I want to say a specific thing. I really don't want ChatGPT to come up with its own wording because it often can be a little off. And I'm finding by this example underneath the particular trigger, because again, this is trigger, instruction, example. Next trigger, user uploads the transcript, request the user to upload it. Example, please upload a transcription of the podcast example. And it goes through this. What's interesting to me, and I don't know that I would necessarily do it this way, is it now that has another subtask on here called example tasks, which are very, very similar to what we just saw above in the step-by-step. And so that's interesting to me. What I think I would rather see if it was me writing this prompt, I would actually rather see few shot examples of a really great result of this entire thing. So I could point to it and say, I think this is what a really good paragraph looks like, yada, yada, yada. Or I think this is what an outline looks like. Now, the trick to this, I will tell you, is sometimes you don't have those examples. Sometimes you have not handwritten what you think is a very good. That would be a long way to do it. So what you can do is run this custom GPT a couple times with no few shot, take the best of 3 or 4 different ways of doing it, bring that, take your time, go make that into a really good example, open back up custom GPT, go back into the instructions and put your few shot in there. So you can get custom GPTs to create your few shot that then enhance and make the prompt even better. And I do that all the time because the long way would mean I would have to quote unquote handwrite it out or whatever. Okay. I know we've talked about this for quite some time today, so we'll wrap this up. But hopefully this is really helpful. Obviously, what we want you guys to do and take away from this, like we've all said, is go in there, get dirty, get your fingers dirty, play with this prompt, try to write a better prompt. If you're stuck, do what I just did. Go to ChatGPT, open up a normal window, say, here's the article, and I want to get better at writing prompts. Can you help me? But this is the new guideline. And it will actually create a little bit of a learning path for you and take you through that process of how to do it. Just say, I need to learn this as if it was in school. Break this down for me step by step and make sure I understand it. Use analogies, use stories, use examples, but use this article as the Bible for how I'm going to go through this. And you can learn how to do this better yourself. What we have coming up the rest of the week, real quick. Let me get to it real quick. Tomorrow, this is something that Aaron shared with us. It's the AI questions you can't afford to ignore. And this is actually a Marcus Sheridan article that I know, Karl, you said he was like a mentor, is a mentor to you or something. So we're going to be talking about an article that Marcus Sheridan put out there. And he had 3 key questions that you can't afford to ignore if you're thinking about AI for your business. We're going to use it as a jumping off point for a great discussion tomorrow. Wednesday, we'll be talking about news. Andy talked about on Thursday, we're going to be talking about, data analytics. The title of that show is Data Analytics is Dead and AI is the Killer. And I cannot wait to talk about that on Thursday. And then Friday, we're going to do a bit of an honest review, but it's going to be Google. It's going to be Google Gemini, but we're going to dive in and be a little more specific about Google Gemini in the workplace, like what they allow right now. Because I think I'm finding in these conversations, people are getting confused about what is actually doable today, what's kind of iffy, and what's definitely a future thing that Google's saying they can do. So on Friday, we'll do our honest review of like, hey, how helpful is Google Gemini in the workplace if you're a business using Google as your workplace? Scale does, just like we would do for Microsoft and Copilot. Hey, how helpful is Copilot inside 365 in the suite of tools? We're going to do the same thing on Friday talking about Google. So that's what we have coming up the rest of the week. And it should be a lot of good conversations. And this was a great kickoff. So hopefully everybody's had it. If you in the States, maybe having a 3-day weekend. Thanks for hanging out with us today. And we will see you again tomorrow. Until then, guys, bye.